There is a room in Bethany, and the night is warm, and the lamps are low. A woman stands at the edge of a table where a man is eating. She is holding something, a jar sealed with wax the size of her fist. The jar contains a perfume called nard, imported from the Himalayan mountains over thousands of miles of trade routes. It cost more than most people in that room will earn in a year. She breaks it, not opens it, breaks it, pours the entire thing, every drop, every denarius of it, over the head of the man at the table. The room erupts. The men around the table are furious. "Why this waste?" one of them demands. "This could have been sold and the money given to the poor." The man at the table silences them, and then he says something that should have made her the most famous woman in the world. "Wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world," he says, "what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Everywhere, forever. And yet, most people today cannot tell you her name. For 1400 years, the church misidentified her entirely. She was the woman Jesus promised to remember, and history forgot her first. She is one of 5 women in this video, and they are 5 of the most important people in the entire Bible. Not because they held positions of power, not because they were queens or prophetesses or generals, because each of them, at a moment when everything was at stake, made a choice that nobody was watching for, nobody was expecting, and nobody, at the time, fully understood. Shiphrah and Puah stood before a Pharaoh and lied to his face to save a generation. Rahab hung a cord of scarlet from a window in a condemned city and pulled a bloodline through the gap. Abigail rode alone in the dark to stop 400 armed men and the man who would become king. A woman with no name talked down a siege from the top of a city wall, saved thousands of lives, and then vanished from the story entirely. And one woman broke a jar of perfume in a room full of people who thought they understood everything, and she was the only one in that room who did. This is their story, and it was always their story. Stay with me. The book of Exodus opens with a problem. The Hebrew people in Egypt have become too many, too strong. Pharaoh, a man so powerful that the text of Exodus never bothers to give him a name, looks out at the nation within his nation and feels something unusual for the ruler of the ancient world's greatest empire. He feels afraid. So he calls 2 women to his palace. Their names are Shiphrah and Puah. They are midwives, women who spend their lives in the most dangerous, most intimate work that existed in the ancient world. They do not command armies. They do not write policy. They stand in dark rooms at the threshold between life and death, and they make sure that life wins. Pharaoh gives them an order. "When you deliver the Hebrew boys," he says, "kill them." That is the entirety of the instruction. No appeal process, no exception. The most powerful man alive has given 2 midwives the task of exterminating a people from the moment of their first breath. The text says they did not do it. It says simply this: the midwives feared God. The Hebrew is Yirat Elohim, a phrase that appears at one of the most sacred moments in all of Genesis, when Abraham has raised the knife over his own son on Mount Moriah. It is not just fear in the ordinary sense. It is the trembling recognition that you are standing in front of something so much larger than any earthly throne, that every earthly throne becomes, in comparison, small. Shiphrah and Puah looked at Pharaoh, they looked at God, and they made their choice. When Pharaoh called them back and demanded to know why the Hebrew boys were still alive, they told him something remarkable. Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, they said. They are vigorous. They give birth before we even arrive. Was it true? We don't know. Scholars have argued about it for centuries. What we know is that Pharaoh believed them, or chose to believe them, and they walked out of that throne room alive. Here's what most people miss about this story. The Bible records the names of exactly 2 people in Exodus chapter 1. The most powerful man in the ancient world is anonymous in Scripture. The 2 people who are named are Shiphrah and Puah, 2 working women who defied him. There is a tradition in the Talmud, recorded in Sota 11b, that identifies Shiphrah as Yochebed, the mother of Moses, and Puah as his sister Miriam. If that tradition is correct, the woman who stood before Pharaoh and lied to his face was the same woman who would later lay her infant son in a waterproofed basket at the edge of the Nile and pray that the river would be kind. She saved an entire generation. Then she saved her own son. The boy she saved would one day stand before that same Pharaoh in that same palace and say, "Let my people go." It begins with 2 midwives. It begins with Yirat Elohim. It begins with 2 women who were afraid of something bigger than the man in front of them. Without Shiphrah and Puah, there is no Moses. Without Moses, there is no Exodus. Without the Exodus, there is no covenant at Sinai, no tabernacle in the wilderness, no promised land, no David, no Solomon, no temple. Without the temple, there is no Jerusalem for a carpenter's son to enter on a Sunday morning on a donkey while a crowd throws palm branches in the road. All of it, the whole long story, rests on the quiet courage of 2 women who looked at the greatest power in the world and decided that God was greater. Move the clock forward 40 years. Moses has led the Hebrews out of Egypt. The Red Sea has opened and closed. An entire generation has lived and died in the wilderness. Now, a new generation stands on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and across the water, on the other side, is the city of Jericho. Massive walls, a garrison city, the key to everything west of the river. Joshua sends 2 spies. They cross the river at night and find themselves at the door of an inn inside the city walls. The woman who owns that inn is named Rahab. The Hebrew word used for her occupation, zonah, has traditionally been translated as prostitute. Some scholars, including the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews, prefer to call her an innkeeper. The debate has never been fully settled. What we know is this: Rahab had heard things. She had heard about the Red Sea. She had heard what happened to the 2 Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, when Israel came through their territory. She had been listening for years to the stories filtering across the trade routes, and she had come to a conclusion that almost nobody else in Jericho had reached. The God of these people is the real God. The king of Jericho hears there are spies in the city and sends soldiers to Rahab's door. She hides the 2 men under stalks of flax on her roof. She sends the soldiers toward the river on a false trail. Then she makes her terms. She tells the spies what she has done and what she knows. She tells them that the entire city is terrified. Their courage has melted. And she says, "Swear to me, by the Lord your God, that when you take this city, my family will be spared." The spies agree, and one of them reaches into his pack and pulls out a cord, a scarlet cord, and tells her to hang it from the window when the army comes. The Hebrew word for that cord is tikvah, but it gets stranger. Tikvah doesn't just mean cord.
Tikvah is one of the primary Hebrew words for hope. The same root appears in the most quoted verse in the book of Jeremiah. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to give you a tikvah. Rahab hung the cord of hope from her window. She didn't know that, but you can look it up. The walls of Jericho fell. Rahab's section stood. She came out with her family, her father, her mother, her brothers, everyone who had been inside her house under that cord, and she lived among the people of Israel from that day on. And then, roughly 1,000 years later, a man named Matthew sat down to write the opening chapter of a gospel and began with a genealogy, the genealogy of Jesus. And in that list of fathers and sons stretching back to Abraham, he stops 4 times to name a woman. One of them is Rahab, the woman Josephus called a shrewd negotiator, the woman some translations called a harlot, the woman who hung a cord of scarlet hope in a condemned window. She is in the bloodline of the Messiah. Eusebius, writing in the 4th century, reflected on the women in that genealogy and noted that they were included not despite their stories, but because of them, because they showed the way grace moves toward people the world has already written off. Rahab made a calculation. She risked everything on a God she had only heard about secondhand, and the God she gambled on wrote her name into the most important lineage in human history.
There is a man in the wilderness of Judah whose name means fool. Nabal. That is his actual name, and the Bible is not subtle about what it intends by it. He is wealthy. 1,000 goats, 3,000 sheep, shearing season in full swing, tables loaded with food. He is also the kind of man who would look at a war hero who had personally protected his shepherds for months and say to his face, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who run away from their masters." David's jaw tightened when those words came back to him. "Strap on your swords," he told his men. 400 armed men, riding at dusk toward one household. Abigail doesn't know any of this yet. She is Nabal's wife, and the text goes out of its way to contrast them. Nabal is harsh and badly behaved. Abigail is Tobat Sekel, a Hebrew phrase meaning not just intelligent, but wise. Someone with deep understanding, a mind that sees around corners. One of Nabal's servants comes to her, not to Nabal, to Abigail. He tells her everything, the insult, the refusal, the 400 men who are already on the road. She moves without telling her husband. She loads donkeys, 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 fig cakes. She moves fast, in the dark, with no military escort, toward an army she has never met, led by a man who is currently furious enough to kill everyone in her household. When she sees David coming down the mountain, she dismounts from her donkey and falls on her face before him. And then she speaks. What comes out of Abigail's mouth is one of the longest speeches any woman gives in the entire Old Testament. It is not a plea, it is not begging. It is a theological argument, a political analysis, and a prophecy delivered in real time to a man whose hand is still on his sword. She tells David the truth of Nabal. Do not let this fool drag you to his level. She takes the blame herself. Let the fault be mine, she says. She appeals to nephesh, the Hebrew word for soul, for the deep seat of who a person actually is, and tells him that shedding innocent blood tonight will follow his soul like a stone in a sling for the rest of his life. And this is where it gets remarkable.
She looks at this fugitive, this wanted man in the wilderness, and she speaks to him as the king he has not yet become. She tells him that God will build him a sure house, a dynasty. She tells him that when that day comes, this night will matter. The man who becomes king must be the man who could have shed blood and chose not to. David stops. He stops the army. He accepts her gifts, and he says to her, "Blessed is your discernment. Blessed are you. You have kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand." One woman, on a donkey, in the dark, between 400 swords and one foolish man's household. She wins. 10 days later, Nabal dies. The text says his heart turned to stone, which most scholars read as a stroke or cardiac event. David sends messengers to Abigail immediately. The woman who saved his soul becomes part of his story. Now, a different war, a different city, a woman whose name we will never know. The place is Abel Beth-Maacah, a city in the far north of Israel. A second revolt has broken out against David. A man named Sheba, son of Bichri, has fled there, and Joab, David's general, has followed with an army. The siege ramp is already going up against the wall. The city is about to be leveled. Here's the part nobody tells you. A woman climbs the wall. The text says she called out from the city. She asked to speak to Joab directly, and Joab, a man who has killed generals and princes without hesitation, stops and listens. She asks why he wants to destroy a mother city in Israel. She calls Abel an ancient place, a place of wisdom, not just a rebel stronghold. Joab says, "I don't want to destroy anything. Hand over Sheba, and the army goes home." The woman says, "His head will come over the wall." She goes back inside. We don't know what she says to the people of the city. We don't know how long it takes. We know the outcome. His head comes over the wall. Joab blows the trumpet. The army disperses. She had no title. She had no army. She had two things, a clear mind and the courage to act inside it. Thousands of people are alive because she climbed a wall. She appears in 2 verses. She disappears from Scripture entirely after that. She has no name in the text. Do you see the pattern? Every time, a moment when official power is failing, a Pharaoh ordering genocide, an army approaching a household, a siege engine rising against a wall, and a woman, no announcement, no formal authority, just a clear mind and the decision to move. Shiphrah and Puah moved in secret. Rahab moved at night. Abigail moved without telling her husband. The woman of Abel moved without even a name. The Bible keeps noticing these women, even when history doesn't.
We come back to the room in Bethany. You know the woman now. Her name is Mary. She lives in a village just 2 miles outside Jerusalem, in a house she shares with her sister Martha and her brother Lazarus, the man Jesus raised from the dead. She has sat at Jesus' feet before, when Martha was annoyed at her for not helping in the kitchen. She chose the better thing, Jesus said then. Now it is 6 days before Passover. Jesus is at dinner in the home of a man called Simon. Lazarus is at the table. Martha is serving. And Mary is standing at the edge of the room with a jar. The jar is alabaster, a soft white stone, sealed at the neck with wax. Inside is nard. The Greek is pisticus nardos, pure nard, a perfume pressed from a plant that only grew in the Himalayan mountains and imported over thousands of miles of trade roads. The jar in her hands is worth 300 denarii. A laborer worked 300 days to earn that amount. She breaks it. She pours it all, every drop, over his head.
The scent fills the room before anyone speaks. It is heavy and sweet and strange, and there is so much of it that it runs from his hair down over his shoulders and onto the floor. An irreversible act. You cannot unbreak an alabaster jar. Pay attention to this. The disciples are furious. The Greek word aganokteo means not just anger, but a burning indignation, the kind that feels morally justified. This is waste. This is recklessness. This perfume could have been sold and the money given to the poor, and everyone in that room knows it. John's Gospel tells us it is Judas who leads the objection. Judas, who will leave this dinner, walk into the city, and by the end of the week exchange a teacher for 30 pieces of silver. The man at the table raises his hand. "Why do you trouble this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me." The Greek is kalon ergon, a noble act, a work of beauty, something done with care and at a great cost. He is not just defending her, he is defining what she has done. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. In that room, in that moment, only one person understood what was coming. Not Peter, who would draw a sword in a garden trying to stop it. Not John, who loved him most. Not the disciples who had walked with him for 3 years. Mary of Bethany, in the act of breaking an alabaster jar, showed that she understood, or was moved to act by something she did not yet have words for, that this man was going to die, and that someone should honor him before it happened. And then he says it. Wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Everywhere, for as long as the gospel is told, her name. He made her a promise, and here is the part that should stop you cold. He kept it. You are hearing about her right now, in a recording made more than 2,000 years after she broke that jar in a room in Bethany. Someone is speaking her name. Wherever this gospel goes, she goes with it. He said so. But the story has a wound in it. In 591 A.D., a pope named Gregory delivered a homily in Rome in which he merged 3 different women from the Gospels into one. He said that Mary of Bethany, the sinful woman of Luke chapter 7, and Mary Magdalene were all the same person. They were not. The Gospels do not say they were. Scholars did not believe they were. But Gregory was persuasive, and his authority was enormous, and for the next 1,400 years the Western Church repeated the error. The Catholic Church did not officially correct the record until 1969. For 1,400 years, the woman Jesus said would be remembered everywhere was not remembered correctly. And yet, the promise held. Her act is still being told. His words proved stronger than a pope's mistake. His memory proved longer than 14 centuries of confusion. He said she would be remembered. She is remembered. The question is not whether God keeps his promises about the hidden ones, the overlooked ones, the ones whose names get mixed up or forgotten or quietly erased. The question is whether you believe he does.
5 women, Shiphrah and Puah, who feared God more than Pharaoh and held a generation's future in their hands at the moment of birth. Rahab, who heard about a God she had never met, hung a cord of hope in a window and found herself written into the bloodline of the Messiah. Abigail, who rode alone into the dark to stop a massacre, and whose wisdom David said had kept his very soul clean. The woman of Abel, no name, 2 verses, a city full of people still alive because she climbed a wall and spoke. And Mary of Bethany, who broke something beautiful and irreversible over the one person in history who deserved it most. 3 things to carry with you.
The first, God does not need official channels. Every woman in this video acted outside the structures of formal authority. They had no title, no army, no appointment. They had a moment and the clarity to understand what the moment required. If you are waiting for permission to do the thing God has already made clear you should do, these women have something to say to you. The second, the act done in secret, is the one that lasts. Not one of these women acted for an audience. Shiphrah and Puah lied to Pharaoh in a private throne room. Rahab hid 2 men under flax in the dark. Abigail rode toward an army at night, alone. The woman of Abel shouted from a wall in a city nobody remembers. Mary broke her jar in a room where the only person who understood what she was doing was the one she was honoring. None of them were performing, they were responding, and those responses are still echoing 2,000 and 3,000 years later. The third, and this is the one that stays with you, Jesus made a woman a promise. He said her act would be told everywhere, forever. He made that promise in a room full of people who were angry at her. He made it 6 days before he was arrested, tried, beaten, and killed. He made it knowing exactly how quickly the world forgets the ones that matter most. And he has kept it. Every time this story is told, he keeps it. You do not need a title. You do not need a platform. You do not need the room to agree with you before you move. You need a moment and the courage to act inside it. These 5 women, 5 of the most important figures in the entire arc of biblical history, did not change the world by being powerful. They changed it by being faithful when no one was watching. If something in this video moved you, share it with someone. Leave a comment about which of these women surprised you most. And if you want to go deeper into the lives of the people Scripture almost forgot, subscribe. There are more of them, and every single one of their stories is worth telling. You just heard one woman's name. He kept his promise. He keeps them all.